Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto Was a Sage Among Wizards. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So now let's start this video. Harry was excited. I'm excited, he exclaimed in a chipper voice, having decided that this was information the Gryffindors who surrounded him at the breakfast table should know. He really thought that they should be too, though their looks of incredulous shock were a strange way of showing it if so. Of course he was used to people not being able to match his excitement. Few people could when he got worked up. But Sakura had always said he should make sure to inform his friends when he got wound up like this. Something about giving them time to leave the country or something along those lines. He hadn't really been paying attention. He supposed it was polite to give them a heads up to watch out for the coming entertainment though, even if that probably wasn't what Sakura had meant. There Harry. Ron hesitated, apparently not sure how to phrase his comment. But eventually he rushed ahead and said, "No one gets excited about going to potions. Well, maybe the snakes, but not Gryffindors. Did you hear what the upper years were saying about his classes? I don't think that even the Claws actually look forward to Snape," he added with amazement. "Well, I will have you know that I am quite looking forward to it. Potions sounds like such a fascinating subject," Hermione commented with bright eyes, though the way she immediately returned to biting her lower lip conveyed she was clearly nervous as well. "It's not the subject so much as who teaches it, Hermione," Ron responded with a tone of finality. As when the eyes of the first-year Gryffindors turned towards the head table, where fortunately Professor Snape wasn't glaring balefully at them, as seemed to be one of his favorite hobbies. Well, glaring balefully at Harry. The rest of Gryffindors seemed to just be a bonus. "Maybe he wouldn't be so bad," Neville said hesitantly, though it was clear that he didn't actually believe it, and was likely the most frightened of the first years at the very idea of the quickly approaching class. "Come on guys, it's going to be awesome." Harry grinned with a slight sinister light in his eyes. But before he could continue, one of the Weasley twins leaned over to say, "Are you planning something, Harry? Something to make?" The other twin continued for him, "Your first potions class a little more interesting. Shall we say?" The first finished the question. "Oh, you just have to take pictures of his face when you prank him." The two looked back at each other and grinned widely before looking back to Harry and continuing to finish the other's sentences. "I don't think anyone has ever dared to prank Snape on the very first day of their first-year classes." "Prank him?" Harry asked with his very best innocent expression. "Why, I would never prank a professor, regardless of how awful he seems to be from what everyone says about him." He waited long enough to savor the twins' crushed expressions, not to mention that of most of the rest of Gryffindor. Though Hermione at least seemed relieved. "No, that would be wrong," he stated sanctimoniously. "On the other hand, I've always been a very lucky person. I mean, a Dark Lord used a death curse that never fails on me, and karma chose that exact moment to bitch slap him for it." Ignoring the uncomfortable shifting at this comment, Harry continued to muse in a thoughtful tone. "I suppose it is possible that should Professor Snape fail as a teacher to the extent you have described, that karma might turn against him a bit as well. Perhaps even in amusing ways. That's how it often seems to work around me anyway. Through no fault of my own, of course." The twins were back to grinning at this point, though Hermione was likewise back to chewing her lip nervously. "Ah, yes," Twin 1 said with a knowing nod. "Of course," the other agreed. "And I guess I could possibly arrange to have some pictures taken should random happenstance fall into place in such a way. I don't have a camera though. Maybe if you let me borrow one." The twins quickly agreed with matching ominous smiles before they hurried off, presumably to obtain one. Hermione briefly looked like she wanted to say something, but she bit back her words and went back to eating hurriedly, though with the occasional sidelong meaningful glance in Harry's direction. It didn't bother Harry though. The other Gryffindors at least were now considerably more excited about potions class than before, which was certainly a good thing. 11-year-olds shouldn't dread the first class of the year like that. If Snape had to suffer a bit to relieve that fear for the students, well, he shouldn't have been such a bastard to cause that kind of fear in the first place. Be a decent teacher or even just human being, and you don't experience pain and humiliation. Any animal could be learn a lesson like that, so he didn't see why the same couldn't work for Snape. Before he could consider his plans and Snape training any further, he noticed the distinctive white plumage of Hedwig swooping down in his direction carrying a letter. It was the first letter he had received since his arrival at Hogwarts, and Harry was a bit confused as to who might be sending him anything. But he took the time to give Hedwig a quick scratch on the head and feed her a strip of bacon before removing the letter and reading it. "Dear Harry, I know you get Friday afternoons off, so would you like to come and have a cup of tea with me around 3? I want to hear all about your first week. Send us an answer back with Hedwig. Hagrid." Looking up from the letter, he glanced around at his friends as he asked, "Hey guys, Hagrid just invited me over this afternoon. Do any of you want to come along?" Ron gave a grunt that could be interpreted as anything, his mouth too full for any actual words to be understood. Neville shrugged indifferently, but he agreed to come. Obviously he didn't particularly care other than it just being a reason to spend time with friends, something it appeared he still wasn't quite used to, but was eager to embrace. Hermione though quickly got rather excited. Oh, he was the one you said knew so much about rare magical creatures. I wonder if he can answer some questions I have. Some of the books I was reading were not very detailed. Of course I'm sure there are better ones in the library, but I just haven't had a chance to read very much about magical creatures. Such a fascinating subject, you know. Before she could continue her somewhat rambling exposition, Harry laughed and interrupted her. She had to have been running out of breath anyway, so it was only the polite thing to do. Calm down, Hermione. I'm sure he will answer whatever questions you have, and maybe he can point you in the right direction for some of the more interesting books too. If anything, Hermione became even more excited at this, though Ron gave her a look of disgust, as she began waxing on about what she might be able to learn. Harry just laughed again as he quickly wrote that they would come for tea that afternoon on the back of the letter, and sent Hedwig back to Hagrid. Maybe some people could become as excited as he did, even if they chose strange things to base their excitement around. Potions took place down in the dungeons, which rumor had it was fairly close to the Slytherin common room. It made Harry pity the Slytherins at least a little bit. He would give it an 8 for atmosphere, if the target atmosphere was ominous and slightly creepy, though that was probably in part due to the various animal body parts in the jars, which lined the shelves along one wall. He wasn't sure why ominous and creepy was the target atmosphere for a classroom, but there was no way this could be an accident. He has seen plenty of magical smokeless torches around the castle, so it wouldn't have been difficult to provide a reasonably cheery and bright room for the students. Instead, Snape appeared to prefer a few scattered candles which gave off a dim red glow, barely sufficient for a normal person to see clearly. Not to mention it lost some overall points based on the classroom being highly dank and slightly chilly, even in the first week of September. And worst of all was the lack of any sort of ventilation. While poisons had never been a particular specialty of his, like with virtually every other shinobi field of study, he had picked up a fairly strong knowledge in the subject over the centuries of his prior lifetime. Poisons weren't quite the same thing as potions, but they seemed to share a similar basis in the same way that seals shared a basis with ancient runes. So he knew that it probably wasn't a great idea to be breathing in random fumes of various bubbling magical substances. It wasn't a problem for him, since he could use wind manipulation to filter anything out of the air he breathed, but the rest of the students were not so lucky. Though perhaps the magical world was simply unaware of such things. The modern non-magical world had only discovered the effects of things too small to see comparatively recently, and given how far behind the magical world seemed to lag, it was quite possible. He would have to set up some hidden seals to filter the air in the room. In addition to it helping to protect his friends, it would probably also annoy Snape, since the man wouldn't understand what was causing it once he inevitably noticed the result. But for now he was more focused on more immediate ways of annoying Snape. Principally the illusion he had already set up. An illusion which activated as the man swept into the room with billowing robes and his typical sneer. There will be no foolish wand waving or silly incantations in this class, the professor said as he took his first steps into the classroom. As such, I don't expect. He finally trailed off as he looked around, noticed that something was definitely very wrong. Apparently he wasn't quite as absorbed in his clearly memorized speech as Harry had hoped. But it was all made worthwhile when his expression slowly transformed to one of profound confusion. What, where? He looked around, clearly baffled at his surroundings, a bafflement which began to spread to the other students who couldn't see anything wrong with the classroom. At this point Snape's wand appeared out of his sleeve, and he murmured a quiet "Tempus," and looked over the glowing numbers which formed into the current time before looking back over the classroom with a still clearly confused expression. Professor Snape?" Malfoy asked from the Slytherin side of the classroom in a tone indicating he was just as confused as Snape appeared to be, though clearly in his opinion for significantly better reason. "Are you alright?" But Snape just ignored the young Slytherin as he continued to examine his surroundings, before finally turning and slowly walking back towards the exits of the classroom. It was Hermione who first grasped the basics of what was going on as she asked in a voice that wavered between horrified and accusatory, "What did you do to Professor Snape?" Or at least as much of those emotions as it was possible to inject into something quiet enough that it could barely even be called a whisper. Harry was relatively certain that she wasn't going to buy his innocent act this time, especially as other Gryffindors nearby started to catch on, and quiet chuckles spread in widening circles around Harry's seat. They might not have been sure exactly what was going on, but after the conversation at breakfast, he was relatively certain that even the more clueless Gryffindors knew he was responsible somehow. Not that it mattered. No one could prove anything at all. And fortunately for Harry, he didn't have to respond to Hermione's question, because Snape had reached the doorway and stuck his head outside of the classroom to look around. This caused the quiet questions of what exactly was wrong with Snape to rise in volume, and provided an opportune excuse for Harry to ignore Hermione. After a few seconds, the once again scowling professor drew his head back into the classroom, at which point Harry dropped the genjutsu he had earlier placed on the man. The reaction was immediate. Snape turned around to face the inside of the classroom once more, and gave a yelp which Harry was fairly certain was very unlike him as he leaped back, actually jumping into the hallway and almost falling over as he stumbled outside. This just caused more snickers from the Gryffindors, and greater confusion from the Slytherin. But this didn't last long as Snape quickly strode back into the room, his robes billowing just as they had in his original entrance. Except this time rather than a haughty sneer, the man was openly furious. The amusement which had spread across at least one side of the classroom quickly wilted under the man's expression as he scanned over the students until his gaze fell on Harry. "Potter," Snape very nearly growled. "You did this." Harry already had an innocent expression prepared from Hermione's question of a handful of seconds ago, so all he did was widen his eyes even further, affecting being startled at the accusation. Hesitantly he asked the glaring man, "What do you mean, Professor Snape? You made me not able to see you or any of the other students. It was just an empty room." He paused long enough to sweep his fierce glower across the room, presumably to discourage any laughter before continuing, "Don't try and lie, Potter. Just like your father to try and slip out of things even when you are obviously responsible. 30 points from Gryffindor for doing such a thing to a professor." "You can't see us?" Harry asked in amazement. He widened his eyes even further, now as wide as possible. He also added a very subtle genjutsu which made his eyes seem even wider, giving an almost unnaturally extreme impression of a wide-eyed child. "Oh, Professor Snape. Do you need help making it to the hospital ward? Maybe a potions accident or something like that? I certainly wouldn't know what would cause something like that. I'm just a first year, after all." Snape's nostrils flared, and his clenched fists started to rise from his sides, before he took a deep breath and regained his calm. When he finally spoke after a couple of silent seconds, his voice was frozen in the depth of its loathing. "Another 30 points from Gryffindor for your cheek, Potter, and detention. For a week, I think." He then whirled around and walked away, finally reaching the front of the class for the first time that morning. "We will see if you can learn a little respect in cleaning floors with Filch. Not that I have high hopes for it." It was only when Snape had turned away from him that Harry allowed his mouth to twitch up in amusement. Humiliation came in a lot of different flavors. The Weasley twins favored the more obvious kind, most frequently color-changing charms on the Slytherin's robes or hair, something similar. It gave some quick laughs, but everyone could see exactly what happened, so really it was just some people who didn't like Slytherins being given an excuse to laugh at them. But to make it appear that a man was going insane, make his totally irrational hatred of an 11-year-old readily apparent to the whole school based on something no one else even saw. It might take longer, especially as there were likely many fully willing to accept that Harry had done something, even if they were not sure what. Besides, even if all of the students knew Harry was responsible, that wouldn't be how Snape would see it. A man like that would only see the people laughing at him behind his back. And that was a deeper humiliation that struck at the heart of how Snape believed others saw him. A man like that was well used to people fearing him, but laughing at him, questioning his sanity, and witnessing him being bested by someone decades his junior. That would likely be a new and very unwelcome experience for the potions professor. Though it was not so different from the effects of Snape's constant humiliations of the students supposedly under his care, really. Maybe Snape would figure it out eventually. Probably not though. The man was just too petty to ever allow himself to accept defeat in this sort of thing, much less actually accept responsibility and change his behavior. Though he expected that Snape's reaction once he learned that Harry truly didn't care about any punishment he could possibly give would be the most painful of all. After all, what did points or house cup mean to him? And detention could always be served by one of his shadow clones. He needed to leave the castle to continue his physical training frequently anyway, so there was a fair amount of time in which a clone would be taking his place. It didn't particularly matter to Harry if the clone was sitting around the common room or cleaning with Filch. In many ways, detention was actually preferable, since he would rather spend time with his friends in person if possible. Once Snape reached the front of the class, he whirled back around to face the students, and quickly ran through the roll, clenching his teeth hard enough that it had to be painful as he ground out Harry's name. When Harry replied, present quite cheerfully, the grinding of the man's teeth was actually audible in the otherwise silent classroom. After making it through the rest of the roll, Snape suddenly snapped out, "Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Oh, I have no idea, Professor." "What would you get?" Harry asked with a bright inquisitive smile. "You get a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the Draught of Living Death," Snape responded with his own twisted smile. As annoyed as Harry's unflappable expression clearly made the man, any chance to bring a little humiliation back to Harry was clearly welcome. Perhaps if you were not such a dunderhead who relied upon your fame carrying you through life, you would know such a simple question. "Well, maybe even someone as foolish as you might know this one," Snape continued. "Where would you find a bezier?" Well, a bezoar is any mass found trapped in the stomach or intestines of an animal. Or human, I suppose. That's kind of gross though. Harry gave an exaggerated grimace. But Snape just continued sneering with, if possible, even greater disdain. Don't be a fool. That's the Muggle definition, which was based on stories of real bezoar from before the Statute of Secrecy. A true bezoar is a stone which sometimes forms exclusively in the stomach of goats, exposed to significant amounts of magic. It is an antidote to almost all poisons. You would know that if you had bothered to read the first 3 chapters of your book. I don't know why I would have expected someone like you to do that though. Oh, you really shouldn't have, Professor Snape, Harry responded, back to his earlier carefree voice, which was quite out of place in the dim castle dungeon, and especially out of place before Snape's angry expression. This is the very first day of potions class. So we haven't had any assigned reading yet. Of course I haven't read the first few chapters. That's alright though. I'm sure I will read all about bezoars this weekend. They sound fascinating. 10 points from Gryffindor for your cheek, Potter, Snape barked out immediately after Harry finished speaking. And you should have known to read ahead of time. It is called preparing for class. Something I'm sure you know nothing about. But your fame won't get you automatic good grades here. The other students, Gryffindor and Slytherin alike, were staring back and forth from Harry to Professor Snape in something akin to awe by now. The Slytherins might not like Harry Potter, but it seemed even they could recognize how unusual it was for someone to speak to Snape like this. And while the Gryffindors would probably later be annoyed at all the points Harry was losing them, for now they instinctively knew that a confrontation like this didn't happen just every day. Or at least it didn't before Harry's arrival at Hogwarts. Still, they knew they should be grateful for the opportunity to bear witness to something which might come to be a legend of Hogwarts. Or at least gossip for the next few weeks. Thanks for the help, Professor Snape. Harry exclaimed with mild excitement. You should really put that into the initial letters though. There wasn't any indication anywhere that we are supposed to begin reading over the summer before we come to Hogwarts. I bet you would get fewer dunderheads if you told us what was expected of us ahead of time, you know. That's another 10 points from Gryffindor for that, Potter, Snape scoffed in response. I suppose some people truly are incapable of learning. Now, what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Well, both of those are the same type of plant. Shouldn't you know that? Harry asked in an inquisitive tone, attempting to make it sound like an innocent question, even though it clearly wasn't. But he didn't give Snape enough time to respond as he continued. Both are common names given to the Aconitum genus of flowering plants. They are also known as aconite, devil's helmet, and blue rocket. It also makes a rather potent poison, which is where it gets most of its names. Shouldn't you be teaching this though? This is the first day of class. My understanding was that professors were supposed to teach us stuff before we were required to know it. This long and rather detailed answer to his question actually caused Snape to freeze for a few seconds, as he blinked back at Harry in shock before he gathered himself and responded angrily, Don't question your professors. That will be another 30 points from Gryffindor. Do you really think that you are too good to learn potions just because you are the boy who lived? Oh, it isn't that I think I am too good for it, Harry replied with a pleased grin. It's just that I am never going to actually need to know it. He held up a hand as if to give him time to continue, as if that would have actually stopped Snape's reaction, if the man hadn't been too surprised to formulate a response quite yet. Of course I'm not saying that no one should learn potions. Some people have to make them. It should just be an elective like arithmancy. Most of us can just buy whatever potions we need, so we don't have to actually know how to make them. From what I saw in Diagon Alley, the basic potions don't really cost much more than the cost of the ingredients anyway, which makes sense because they are easy and quick. And the difficult ones are not safe if you don't have a potions master to make them. So learning potions is pretty pointless for anyone who isn't going to become a potions master. I'm sure you agree, Harry stated with a shrug as if it was a foregone conclusion. No, I do not agree, Snape very nearly yelled in an outraged voice. His hands once again clenched around the edges of his desk. Potions is a noble art, and just because you are too incompetent to manage it, doesn't mean no one should even try. And that will be another 50 points from Gryffindor. And another week of detention. Snape gave him another glare at this point, though Harry wasn't sure what this was supposed to accomplish, since he had been glaring more or less continuously since class began. But what did I do wrong, Professor Snape? Harry asked, returning to his earlier innocent expression. I was just answering the question you asked. Do we get detentions for answering questions incorrectly? I'm sure Professor McGonagall would have mentioned something like that. You lost points and received detention because of your lack of respect and outright insults, Snape snarled. I doubt you are capable of learning respect, Potter, but as your teacher, I shall do my best. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Professor Snape. I certainly didn't mean anything like that. I deeply apologize for any insult I might have given on accident. Harry then smiled sweetly at the man, which he knew would only infuriate him further. And he was proven correct as the wood of the desk Snape continued to grip creaked audibly. But Snape didn't respond, perhaps aware that even the Slytherins would likely think he was insane if he started yelling at Harry for daring to humbly apologize. The fact that both Harry and Snape clearly knew that the apology was totally insincere wasn't really relevant. So the professor tore his gaze away from Harry with visible difficulty and gestured to the board at the front of the class as he gave instructions to the class of children, who seemed to have just as much trouble shifting their attention from the drama, if it could be called that, which had taken place in front of them moments before. The instructions for the Boil Cure potion are on the board. Complete the potion by the end of class. The man then spent the rest of the class returning to an almost continuous glare focused on Harry with laser-like intensity. Harry didn't mind though. It meant that Snape didn't miss all the little things like the fact that Harry prepared a perfect potion, which wasn't difficult for him, with all of his various advantages. It probably wouldn't help him if he ever wanted to become a potions master and actually make original potions, which based on what he had been able to gather, seemed to require an exhaustive understanding of potions' ingredient reactions and an innate feel for the potions themselves. But for the comparatively simplistic potions taught at Hogwarts, all that was really required was following very precise instructions. And precision was something he could do extremely well. With the Sharingan, he could actually see the magic of the ingredients, so when the instructions said to put half of a slug in, he could tell much more precisely how much he actually needed to put into the potion by comparing how much magic was in the various slugs to work out an average and include only the correct amount to make the potion perfect. He also had hand-eye coordination, which would probably be considered supernatural, so dicing ingredients into exact eighths, or stirring exactly 13½ rotations, were all easily accomplished. Snape clearly didn't like the fact that he was apparently very talented at potions, especially in light of his earlier dismissal of the subject as something not worthy of his interest. Of course, the man didn't seem to like anything Harry did by now. Even the few things he did in class that were not aimed at further aggravating Snape, such as helping some of his fellow Gryffindors avoid mistakes with their potions, were met with a swift loss of further points. Apparently that was disruptive. Harry made sure to place another genjutsu on him, so that Snape, and only Snape, would hear a cheerful humming coming from Harry for that one. It lost yet more points that Harry didn't care about, and made Snape look like a lunatic yet again, when he insisted that Harry stop. So solid win in Harry's view. Best of all, it would probably take until one of the Slytherins pointed it out for Snape to begin to understand what happened. It was nice to know he could infuriate the man even when Harry wasn't nearby. But for the most part, he let the rest of the class pass in relative peace. He didn't want to push Snape too far after all, though with Snape's near continuous absurd level of abuse for a teacher towards a student, Harry found it hard to hold back. But for now, he was happy with keeping things at a low simmer with his obnoxiously high degree of skill at brewing. Unfortunately, eventually the exceedingly entertaining class came to an end, though as Snape called out, "Everyone bottle and label a sample of your potion to be graded and clean out your cauldrons. Class is over." The resulting rush of students seemed especially eager to get out at that point, though Harry didn't really blame them. If he had truly been 11 years old, he probably would have equally quick to get away from the glare which hadn't left Snape's face for more than a handful of seconds for the entire double period, even if that glare was rarely directed at any of them. And Harry's bright smile in response to that glare seemed to disturb at least the Slytherins to an almost equal degree. So Harry let them rush ahead as he carefully bottled and labeled a sample of his perfect Boil Cure potion to take to the front of the classroom behind most of the other students. In fact, only Hermione, Ron, and Neville were hanging back at this point, though each of them stayed well back and looked quite nervous even so. So when Harry placed his potion on the front table, not even Hermione seemed particularly shocked when Snape accidentally brushed his robe sleeve across the potion sample to knock it off the table and shatter it on the ground. Apparently not even her general faith in authority figures could quite stand up to the level of mistreatment as Snape had exhibited that day, though how long that would last was anyone's guess. Harry just smiled even more widely though. Will smiled and seamlessly activated a modified replacement technique to switch the falling bottle with another from the desk. "How unfortunate, Potter," Snape sneered with what was the first expression that morning that could really be called a smile, as he spoke in a satisfied voice. "It seems you have no potion to be turned in. I suppose I will have to give you a 0. And I think another 20 points from Gryffindor for failing to turn in a potion sample as instructed." "You know, I don't actually think Gryffindor has any points to take by this point," Harry mused. He then bent over and picked up the shard of glass from the ground which held the label, which he held out to Snape as he called out, "Besides, this one was Malfoy's. See?" "What?" Snape practically screeched. "No, that's impossible," he exclaimed as he grabbed the label which clearly read Draco Malfoy. "Yeah, that's pretty unfortunate," Harry replied in a vaguely sympathetic tone. "Too bad he has to get a 0 though. His seemed almost as close to the exact right shade the book describes as mine was. I would think he would get a chance to make a replacement potion, but I guess if that is what your rule is, he will just have to live with it." And I suppose the Slytherins can afford losing that 20 points better than Gryffindor after this morning. Harry gave a casual shrug as he trailed off meaningfully. But Snape apparently didn't find this as amusing as Harry did, as he dropped Malfoy's label back onto the ground and seized a handful of Harry's robes to yank him forward. If Harry had been a normal 11-year-old, it probably would have pulled him off his feet, but he found it easy enough to keep up with Snape. "Potter," he snarled, with his face even more twisted with blatant hatred than his normal expression. "I'll see you expelled for this." "For what, Professor Snape?" Harry asked with mild curiosity. "For academic sabotage. For cheating, insults to a professor, and deliberate incitement of other students. Pick one," he spat. Literally spat, as Harry had to shift his head to avoid the spittle. "Oh, that's too bad." Harry nodded sympathetically to Snape before looking over his shoulder at his friends, who were still standing at the entrance to the potions classroom looking at Harry with mouths gaping in shock and horror. "I'll see you guys at lunch in a little bit," he called out to them with a casual wave behind him in their direction. "I guess I have to talk to Professor Dumbledore for a little while first though." Snape just snarled again, and yanked harder on the handful of Harry's robes he held clutched in his fist, while Hermione, Neville, and Ron continued to stare after him silently. Snape physically dragging Harry through the corridors of Hogwarts drew quite a bit of attention. The last morning class had let out just moments before and everyone was headed to lunch. So quite a few people were still loitering along the path the potions professor took from the dungeons to the base of the headmaster's tower. Snape didn't seem to care though. Neither did Harry. More witnesses meant more people interested in the potions class Harry had just attended, which in turn meant more people to hear about the man's humiliation, and to soon witness his impotence against Harry. Because if Snape really believed that Dumbledore was going to expel the boy who lived on the very first week of classes based on mild backtalk and some pranks which could have been committed by anyone, he was truly delusional. That was what anger did though. It made people stupid. And Harry had worked rather hard over the past couple hours to put Snape into that exact state, though it wouldn't have been nearly as effective if Snape hadn't been predisposed to hate Harry on principle and blame everything on him. Harry still wasn't sure why Snape reacted to him that way, but he was fully prepared to use it for his own amusement. Regardless of why, Snape seemed content to stride through the hallways in a fuming silence, and Harry left him to it. The occasional cheerful smile and energetic wave from Harry whenever they passed someone he knew probably didn't help Snape calm down. Eventually they reached a large stone gargoyle which stood in front of the winding staircase, presumably leading up to the headmaster's office. Snape barely even slowed down. As they approached the statue, he growled out, "Ice mice." The gargoyle then leapt aside, though Harry wasn't quite sure if the speed it moved out of the way was normal, or if it realized that Snape wasn't going to slow down if it didn't move out of the way fast enough. And the hand that wasn't gripping Harry's robes to drag him along was fondling his wand, probably itching for something to dare to get in his way to give him an excuse to unleash some of his aggravation. Either way, the gargoyle apparently didn't want to find out exactly what Snape intended, and had moved away from its position guarding the stairs well before they arrived, even at their fast pace. A pace which didn't slow down at all as they made their way up the stairs, apparently towards the headmaster's office. Once they made their way up the winding staircase, Snape gave a single knock at the door, and waited just long enough to hear Professor Dumbledore begin answering, though not long enough to hear what he was saying, before pushing the door open and entering along with a bemused Harry. "Come in, Sev." Dumbledore trailed off with one long droopy white eyebrow raised. Eventually he continued after having looked over the two of them, but came to a stop in front of his desk. "Please, come in and have a seat. Would either of you like a lemon drop?" He gave a kindly smile as he held out a bowl full of the yellow candies. Snape gave a rather waspish no, and dropped into one of the seats, giving a push that was rather harder than strictly necessary to Harry towards another. Fortunately, Harry was quite significantly stronger than Snape, so he ignored the man's push, and gleefully scooped out a small handful of candy from the offered bowl. Popping two into his mouth, he replied with a voice only slightly garbled by two hard candies he was now sucking on, "Thanks, Professor Dumbledore." A slight pressure against his mind-woking shields told him that the candies were apparently dosed with some sort of mind-altering potion. Most likely either a mild calming potion or possibly a minor truth potion. Not that Harry could blame the man. If he had access to that sort of thing in his previous life, he probably would have dosed all of his visitors too. Though he doubted something this week would do anything against the disciplined mind of a well-trained ninja, even without his mind-woking shields, but every little bit helped. "So, what seems to be the problem?" Professor Dumbledore asked with a cheerful twinkle in his eye and a small amused smile, as he settled down into his own rather plush chair. The Snape growled angrily before trailing off, apparently trying to find a way to describe Harry in a way appropriate for his current mood, and yet polite enough to not get him in trouble with the headmaster. Harry gave the seething man a cheerful smile, and slurped rather loudly on his candies. "This boy," Snape eventually continued with a snarl, "pranked me in the middle of the classroom, talked back to me throughout the lesson, and deliberately sabotaged another student's finished potion. The headmaster leaned back behind his desk, with eyes widening to show his surprise as he looked over to Harry from Snape. He then opened his mouth to respond. Probably either to ask for some clarification or perhaps to comment on Harry's continued happy grin in the face of Snape's rather severe accusations. However, he didn't get a chance to say anything as the irate potions professor continued his rant. I told you this would happen, Albus. I told you he would come here with a swelled head, thinking he could get away with anything just because he's famous. I told you he would be as bad as his father. No, worse than his father. Not even Potter would have dared pranking a teacher on the very first day of his first year. I told you he should never have been here. I told you, but you didn't listen. Well, now you can correct your mistake and throw him out. Professor Dumbledore gave Snape a few moments to make sure he was done before he turned with a far graver expression than he had earlier shown and looked at Harry. At which point the man's eyebrow once again cocked up in surprise and he asked, "You seem quite accepting of this turn of events. Do you understand that you are in quite a bit of trouble, Mr. Potter?" "Sure, I guess so," Harry responded, still smiling. "These candies are just so good. I don't think anyone could eat them and not smile." A pleased smile appeared on Professor Dumbledore's face, along with the return of the twinkle in his eye, as he reached over and plucked one of the lemon drops from the bowl and popped it into his own mouth. "Ah, I quite agree, Harry. Most people refuse one when I offer, which I haven't ever understood. I'm quite glad that you see the joy such a simple little thing can bring. Regardless of whatever else is going on in the world, you can always rely on a lemon drop to remind you of the simpler, happier things. Why, once, when I was younger..." It seemed that the aged headmaster wasn't paying attention to Snape as he began to wonder over the marvel that was the lemon drop. Harry, however, had been watching the man as his glare became harsher, his white-knuckled grip on his armrests tighter, and his grinding teeth louder the longer Professor Dumbledore continued. In fact, Harry was beginning to have trouble maintaining his bright and innocent smile, and not breaking out into laughter. He didn't know if the headmaster was just a bit senile, truly did love lemon drops that much, or if the man was actually going along with Harry's attempts to nettle Snape. Regardless, it was among the most amusing things he had seen in what had already been a very entertaining day. But finally Snape could apparently take no more and burst out, "Enough, Albus. No one cares about your unnatural love of a piece of candy. We are here to discuss Potter's punishment." Professor Dumbledore cleared his throat and stated in a far more serious tone, "Yes, of course." Turning back to Harry, he continued, "Mr. Potter, Professor Snape has had some very bad things to say about your actions in today's potions class. Can you explain your behavior to us?" "Oh, you mean all that stuff with the prank, backtalk, and potion sabotage Professor Snape was talking about?" Harry waited for Professor Dumbledore to nod his head before popping another lemon drop into his mouth, and continuing, "Yeah, I didn't do any of that." Snape immediately straightened in his chair and turned the full strength of his glare onto Harry, not that it had often left him for the duration of this meeting. "Potter. Were you lying, little?" Before Snape could get any further, Professor Dumbledore cut him off with a rather sharp reprimand for the apparently generally easygoing elderly man. "That's enough, Severus." The headmaster then turned to Harry and continued in a gentler tone, "Can you please explain what happened from your perspective, Harry?" "Sure, Professor," Harry answered with a nod. Professor Snape was acting kind of weird when he first walked into the room at the beginning of the class. He looked around with an odd expression, then walked out of the room while ignoring everyone's questions. But he seemed okay after that. No one seemed to really know what happened though. Then I answered some of his questions, explaining my views when he asked, but I certainly didn't do any backtalk, or not on purpose anyway. And I don't even know what he is talking about with sabotaging another student's potion." Professor Dumbledore sighed and leaned back in his chair at this before turning to Snape. "Severus, if you could explain your accusations in a bit more detail, please." Snape continued glaring at Harry for another long moment before he turned, now facing Professor Dumbledore as he answered in a voice filled with forced calm, clearly barely holding his rage at bay. "When I first entered the classroom, it appeared to me that none of the students were in the class. As I entered exactly on time for the class to start, this was highly unusual, so after a few moments, I left the room to make certain the students were not loitering in the hallways. As soon as I stepped outside, I was suddenly able to hear the students in the classroom, and see them as I looked back. It was clearly an attempt by Potter to make me look foolish in front of my students." Snape then took a deep breath, clenching his hands around the chair's armrests briefly once again, as he gave a brief glare in Harry's direction before continuing. He then proceeded to spend the rest of the class answering my questions with a total lack of respect, openly questioning the validity of potions as a subject, and dismissing my attempts to censure his behavior, or even give him point deductions or detentions. Then finally, when his own potion was knocked off the table, he used a switching charm of some kind, to replace his falling potion with Draco Malfoy's, shattering it on the ground. "Do you have any actual evidence I was responsible for that prank?" Harry asked incredulously. This time he didn't wait for the headmaster to prompt his response. "It sounds like some sort of powerful targeted notice me not spell," but I wouldn't have any idea how to actually cast something like that. I'm just a new first year, after all. Snape turned to Harry as he spoke and returned in what was apparently his customary snarl. You could have hired someone else to set up the spells. How would a dunderhead like you even know what a targeted notice me not is otherwise? Once again, do you have any evidence that I was responsible? Harry asked with just a twitch of a smile. Even if this was a prank, it could have been anyone. And I know of that spell because I was reading a book about ancient runes that mentioned something similar is often included in defensive ward setups. It didn't describe how such a thing would actually be performed though. It's just an introductory book, after all. I know it was you, Potter. Snape exclaimed, leaning forward in his chair as if he was preparing to stand, probably to attempt to throttle him or something similar, given his expression. Just like your father, you wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. Well, it won't work this time. Severus, please calm yourself and remain silent until Harry has had a chance to explain himself, Albus interrupted, pinching the bridge of his nose in annoyance, or perhaps with the onset of a headache. Harry could see how regular dealing with Snape could cause a headache for anyone. The thought set off a surge of pity for the old man, having to put up with someone like Snape and not prank the daylights out of him. Professionalism could be pretty boring. Not that Harry would know from personal experience. It sure seemed boring though. But maybe his own pranks towards Snape would help the headmaster feel better by proxy. Surely anyone who had to spend any amount of time with Snape would wish they could prank the man, even if they felt bound by the responsibilities of their position to not go through with it. Anyway, that's all I know about the prank, Harry continued. For the backtalk, I was just answering his questions. Actually, on that subject, I really think I should present my idea to you. I think what upset Professor Snape was that I suggested that potions wasn't really necessary for most students to learn, since most of us don't ever really need to use it again after graduation. So I was thinking that you could create a cooking class for the first 2 years. It would teach pretty much the same thing: careful ingredient preparation, and how to follow a recipe correctly. But cooking is something everyone will need someday, unlike making potions, Harry said with a grin as he popped another lemon drop into his mouth, careful to watch as Snape's face turned a darker and darker red, bordering on purple. And for those who are interested in going into professional potions brewing, they can take potions as an elective, and the rest of us can replace it with something we will actually need in our lives after graduation. Professor Dumbledore appeared thoughtful at that, though he did seem to be periodically glancing at the shade of Snape's face with some concern. Eventually the old man responded with eyes twinkling once again. That's an interesting idea, Harry my boy. Certainly it is something to be considered, anyway. I suppose I can understand how such a revolutionary idea might not be taken well by Severus. But for now, what about the last issue Severus raised? Harry nodded, giving a slightly confused expression as he answered, well, I'm not sure about that one. I wasn't really watching closely, but it did seem like the bottle Snape knocked off the table was the one I submitted. I guess I just really hoped that my potion wouldn't break. I thought the potion turned out pretty well, and I didn't want to lose my work like that. So I suppose it's possible that I did some accidental magic to do a switching charm, I think Professor Snape called it. I didn't mean to mess anyone else's potion up though. I didn't really mean to do anything at all. I mean, I didn't have my wand out or anything, so I don't see why anyone would think it was purposeful magic, even if I knew how to perform a switching charm. Can we get in trouble for accidental magic, even though we didn't mean to do it? At this point Harry turned on his most innocent expression, eyes wide, with just a hint of worry mixed in. Professor Dumbledore probably wouldn't really buy it, but it would further infuriate Snape. And the headmaster had seemed content to go along with Harry's nettling of Snape so far today. Especially since Professor Dumbledore might have hidden it quickly, but Harry had seen the flash of true annoyance at Snape when he mentioned Snape being the one to knock his potion off the table in passing. Clearly the man knew Snape had been trying to destroy Harry's potion as well as he did. But Professor Dumbledore didn't mention it any more than Harry did. There wasn't much point, since all three knew the truth, but no evidence existed to prove Snape's actions had been purposeful, any more than any existed to prove Harry's actions had been purposeful. Instead, the headmaster's brow creased beyond its normal wrinkles as he leaned back in his chair, apparently thinking deeply, before turning to Snape to say, perhaps it would be best to review the memories of the events in question to clarify things. Clearly your perspectives on this matter are a bit different, so an unbiased reviewing of these events might help for both of us. Snape seemed annoyed at this, but grudgingly nodded before Harry asked, wait, what do you mean by review the memories? You can use magic to show people your memories. Ah, yes Harry, my boy, Dumbledore answered with a smile and a bright twinkle in his eye, as he looked back at Harry. A most marvelous magical device called a pensieve allows us to extract our memories and watch them once again ourselves, or share them with others. It's most useful in keeping your thoughts organized and reviewing old memories for details, which might have been forgotten by the conscious mind. It is especially helpful at my age. Old men such as myself need as much help as we can get to keep up with all of the memories filling our heads. Harry gave a thoughtful nod at this. That did seem extremely useful. There wasn't always time for such a careful review, but if this device really did allow the perfect capture of every detail of a memory, there were any number of times in which reviewing memory for the details which were missed while in the moment could be extremely important. Even the Sharingan wasn't a perfect substitute, as it recorded only visuals. Could I provide my own memories to perhaps show my side of things a bit better than what Professor Snape remembers? Harry asked. He would need to be careful of exactly which memories he supplied, but it shouldn't be difficult to give memories which showed the entire period in question without anything incriminating appearing. None of what he had done in that classroom had required hand signs, so there had been no visible sign of him doing anything at all. But this line of thought was interrupted as Professor Dumbledore answered, "Unfortunately, because you are a natural occlumens, you won't be able to directly use a pensive, Harry. You see, the defense of a natural occlumens is so absolute that nothing can get in or out of such a mind. This means you cannot give memories for a pensive, nor can you connect your mind with one to directly view memories, since this involves the pensive magically inserting the memory into your mind. Some pensivs do have a projection function that creates a physical image of the memory which you could watch, but this is substantially less detailed than the immersive experience of entering a pensive." Harry frowned at that. Of course this restriction didn't actually apply to him, since he wasn't truly a natural occlumens. But he couldn't exactly explain that he used chakra to create immensely powerful mind-walking walls, which he could drop part or all of at any time if he wished. So for now he would have to go along with the restrictions a natural occlumens apparently operated under. It was too convenient an explanation to give up easily. "Are there any other negatives to being a natural occlumens, Professor Dumbledore?" he asked, content to continue to ignore the silently brooding Snape. Though the fact that the man did appear to have calmed himself somewhat was a little disappointing. Still, this was more important for now. "Oh, I suppose there are a few," the headmaster answered. "Mostly in not receiving some of the benefits available to a true master of occlumency. For example, a master of occlumency can project false thoughts, tricking a legilimencer into the belief that the occlumen's mental walls had been breached, and they were seeing their true thoughts. There are also some spells or potions that can be medically beneficial, such as a cheering charm or calming draught, which can affect a natural occlumens, no more than any other magical mental effect. Most agree that the benefits far outweigh the negatives though. First, that you have no need to put the time and effort of studying a complex and difficult magical art, such as a normal occlumens would. And more importantly, any normal occlumens, no matter how skilled, can potentially have their occlumency barriers eventually breached. A natural occlumens has no such fear, regardless of the power or subtlety of the mental spell or potion." Harry nodded before giving a brief shrug and popping his last lemon drop into his mouth. "Well, nothing I can do about it one way or the other, so there isn't really any point worrying about it, I guess." Professor Dumbledore gave a gentle smile at this, and nodded his agreement as he responded, "That's a very mature way of looking at it, my boy. It's never helpful to waste time fretting about what cannot be changed. Better to focus on the things you can do to improve yourself and help others." He then turned to Snape and requested, "I suppose it is time to view those memories, and decide what needs to be done about this little issue though." Snape nodded, and the two men stood to walk over to a locked drawer, from which a large shallow bowl covered in complicated runes was removed. As always, the runes fascinated Harry, and he made sure his Sharingan recorded as much of the surface of the bowl as was exposed to him from his position. Such complicated runes might be far beyond his current understanding of ancient runes, but the Sharingan would keep the image recorded until he was ready to review it once again with a greater understanding of the subject. Once the bowl was placed on the headmaster's desk, Snape pulled his wand out and placed the tip against his temple, slowly pulling it away with a strange silvery substance which followed after Snape's wand-like guided mist. He then deposited the silvery substance into the pensive, and repeated the process several additional times, before both men dunked their heads directly into the shifting thick silver mist which filled the bowl. The next few minutes were disappointingly boring. Both men remained unmoving, and though there were many unusual and potentially interesting items filling Professor Dumbledore's office, there were far too many magical paintings watching him to allow for any sort of experimentation. So after using his Sharingan to memorize a perfect picture of everything in the room, he was at a bit of a loss of what else he could do. Another prank on Snape might be interesting, but he didn't want to push things too far this early, and he couldn't be too obvious right in front of Professor Dumbledore. Even if the man was somewhat sympathetic, his professionalism would probably prevent him from letting Harry get away with being too blatant. So instead, after a brief stop at the candy bowl to refill, he dropped into the headmaster's extremely comfortably chair behind the oversized desk, and settled back into the ample cushions for a kip. Albus almost burst out with a chuckle when he emerged from the pensive to find young Harry asleep in his own chair. That level of confidence, or perhaps simply not caring what anyone else thought, would make his own plans somewhat more difficult. But he had to shake his head in wonder at an 11-year-old who was not only willing to steal the chair of the headmaster of his school, while said headmaster was less than 10 feet away, but who was so unconcerned in such circumstances, he could actually fall asleep. though Severus seemed unable to find the humor in the situation, to Albus's complete lack of surprise. "Potter," the man snarled. "Get out of that chair, you presumptuous little." Albus almost sighed audibly as he once again had to interrupt to prevent Severus from saying something he really shouldn't to a child. Any child really, but most especially not this child. But instead of sighing, he cut in before Severus could finish whatever he had been intending to say. "Harry, my boy. You slept well, I hope?" he asked with a grandfatherly smile. "That chair really is quite comfortable, though I seldom find myself with the time to do the same." As Albus had mostly expected, Harry gave a carefree yawn and stretched before smiling brightly at the two, in spite of Severus's glare, and replied, "Oh yeah, this is one of the most comfortable chairs I've ever found. I might have to come borrow it sometime." "Well, unfortunately," Albus responded, "these old bones do need a chair like that one. But perhaps you can find another similarly comfortable chair for yourself eventually." A little deprecating humor could help him connect with the boy, and perhaps more importantly, Albus suspected that Harry might truly steal the chair as a prank if he didn't draw out a bit of pity. And he was beginning to think that Harry might be successful in such an attempt. Best not to tempt fate. Harry just shrugged and stood to move out of the way, motioning for Albus to take his own chair back. Albus wasted no time in reclaiming his seat, and waited only long enough for the other two to take their original chairs once again, before clearing his throat and saying, "Comfortable chairs aside, it would be best to address the issue at hand." Receiving nods all around, he continued, "I've reviewed the pertinent memories, and you are correct, that there isn't any evidence of active wrongdoing on your part, Harry. And of course we don't punish accidental magic here. You could have perhaps been a bit more respectful in your responses to the questions you were asked, but Severus clearly overreacted with many of his point deductions and assignments of detentions. I think a loss of 5 points in total for the class is appropriate for minor lack of respect, with no detentions." Harry smiled in response to this, though Dumbledore thought he might have also smiled, if he had been told the point loss and detentions would stand, given his earlier reactions. Severus on the other hand started sputtering in outrage, but was silenced with a quick look, for now at least. And once Severus quieted down, Harry responded, "Sure, that sounds fine. Though it doesn't really matter much. I wasn't going to go to the detentions anyway, and I don't really care much about points." Severus's glare intensified somehow at this, but Albus just raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, you do have to go to any detentions assigned. You can't just skip them because you don't like detentions." He then gave a small smile and pushed a touch of magic into his eyes, for the usual twinkle as he continued, "I don't think anyone would attend their detentions if that were the case." "Oh, no, Professor Dumbledore," Harry replied. "It doesn't have anything to do with not liking detention. I'm sure detention with Mr. Filch would have been plenty of fun." The fact that this was said with a straight face was almost as surprising as Harry's other actions today, but Albus was given no time to dwell on it, as Harry continued speaking as if his appreciation for detentions with Argus was unimportant. "But if you don't have any evidence that I did anything wrong, it isn't right to give me detentions, so I wasn't going to go." Albus allowed the small frown of a grandfather disappointed in the actions of a cherished grandchild to emerge at this statement. "Well, Harry, I can assure you that this is not the usual way things are done. Professors only give detentions when they feel there is a deliberate breaking of a rule, and unlike the loss of house points, all assignments of detention go to the head of your house for review before the detention is served. You will have to serve any detentions that are assigned to you though. The consequences for ignoring assigned detentions can be quite severe, even up to expulsion for repeated offenses." Though Albus didn't mention that while detentions were technically reviewed by the student's head of house, they were almost never overruled. Doing so was seen as weakening the authority of the other professors in the eyes of the students, and only Pomona, ever defensive of her Hufflepuffs, had done so at all in recent years. Still, the rule's existence did generally keep Severus's bias mostly contained to just taking points. But whether Harry knew this or not didn't really seem to matter as the boy answered in an unconcerned voice, "Well, if your system for detentions works, it isn't really a problem. I will be happy to serve any detention assigned for good cause, but I wouldn't serve a detention just because a professor, as you said, overreacted and jumped to the conclusion of my guilt for something anyone could have done. And as for being expelled, well, I really don't think the Board of Governors or the general public would be pleased with seeing me expelled, because I didn't attend a detention that I didn't deserve in the first place. But I guess if it came to that, I'm sure Beauxbatons or Durmstrang would be happy to have me." At this, Severus could no longer remain silent, in spite of Albus's repeated attempts to warn him not to respond in anger. Though Albus hadn't really expected Harry to push back quite this hard, even given his earlier clear disregard for authority. "Are you threatening us, Potter?" Severus growled as he leaned towards Harry. "You will do as you are told, or—" Not even Albus was quite sure what Severus thought would happen if Harry continued his present defiance. In fact, he doubted Severus knew, as angry as the man was, but Albus couldn't afford to let him make a threat which couldn't be backed up. "Severus, calm yourself," he stated in a kindly voice, with just a hint of steel beneath the surface. I think it is clear that young Harry didn't mean that as a threat, but just to inform us that he was aware of the many safeguards in place to keep the system of punishments used at Hogwarts as fair and reasonable as they were originally intended. And just as Albus had expected, Harry responded with a bright smile as he said, "Oh, of course, Professor Dumbledore. I would never threaten a professor, and I know that a school as great as this one would never allow unjust punishments to be put on an undeserving child." How the boy said all of that with a straight face, Albus would never understand, but he did appreciate Harry's willingness to play along with the polite fiction they were both spewing. Harry even seemed genuinely happy about it, as if he believed that just because he was threatening them with a public scandal was no reason they couldn't be friendly and respectful. All of this passed through Albus's mind in an instant. He would spend more time contemplating these new developments later, but for now he just gave the boy a twinkling smile, and nodded as he said, "Quite right, my boy. I would ask that you come to me in the future if you do plan on skipping out on what you believe to be an unreasonable detention. I don't think it will come up, but it would be best if we cleared things up from the beginning, rather than escalating things based on a misunderstanding." Harry nodded and popped another lemon drop into his mouth. "Sure, Professor. You can clear up anything in the future just like you did today." "Alright then, Harry," Albus said as he leaned back in his chair. "Off you go. You had best hurry to the Great Hall or you'll miss lunch entirely." And with that, the boy gave a quick wave and strolled out of his office, seemingly without a care in the world. Severus, on the other hand, barely even waited for the door to click shut before he began in what was just barely short of an outraged shout, "Albus, you can't let him just get away with everything like that." "Severus, be reasonable," Albus asked in a weary voice, momentarily feeling every one of his 109 years. Dealing with one impossible child tearing down so many of his carefully developed plans without even trying was difficult enough. Putting up with Severus when he got into a mood like this and was unwilling to listen to reason pushed an already stressful morning beyond the bounds of anything he particularly wished to deal with. Unfortunately, the world had a way of seldom conforming to his wishes. "Be reasonable, you say," Severus sneered contemptuously. "So it is reasonable to let a child get away with doing whatever he feels like. Pranking his professor and mocking me to my face, regardless of how he tried to play it off. And then, not even happy with pushing you back to the mildest of rebukes, he threatens us to our faces, and it's reasonable to just do whatever he wants out of fear of an 11-year-old. Will he be running Hogwarts by next week because you don't want to upset your precious boy who lived? And all of this is somehow the reasonable thing to do?" "No, Severus," Albus responded with a heavy sigh. "Be reasonable because you are treating Harry as if he is simultaneously the mirror of his father, and yet as if he will respond to our actions as the boy I expected to come to Hogwarts. Uneducated in the ways of the wizarding world. Uncomfortable in his fame. But that is not what we have gotten." At this point Albus abruptly stood from his chair and began pacing agitatedly as he continued, "I say be reasonable because the threat you seem to believe I should have ignored is very real. This is no bluff. He is right that if he were thrown out of Hogwarts, which we cannot afford to do because we need to keep him closed regardless, by the way. But if he were indeed thrown out of Hogwarts for refusing to attend a detention assigned to him with no evidence supporting his guilt, the public outrage would be immense. I couldn't protect you because I would be too busy desperately holding on to my own position. You cannot ignore the fact that he not only holds real power over us in many ways, and more importantly, he knows it, and is perfectly willing to use that power if we push him to it. But he is guilty." Severus cried out in frustration. "Of course he's guilty," Severus, Albus answered in an annoyed tone as he dropped back into his seat. "We both know that." There was no true surprise when young Draco's potion was the one which ended up on the floor. And no one is that polite in the face of such antagonism, unless they are trying to get under someone's skin. Which you succeeded at quite well, I must add. As for the prank, even the other Gryffindors knew he was responsible, though they didn't seem to know how any more than I do. Severus started to respond, but Albus interrupted him rather sternly, "But it doesn't matter if he is guilty. No evidence of any wrongdoing exists, and without evidence, if I wish to have him see me as someone he can trust, I must side with him. And right now, you know as well as I do that very little matters more than having that boy grow to trust and believe in me. He must accept my guidance to stay within the light. Especially given his currently lack of respect for authority. That sort of thing could all too easily evolve into something very dangerous as he gets older without proper guidance. I wish you would learn to move past your own issues with Harry, and separate your view of him from anything his father did to you almost 2 decades ago." Albus paused at this point and shook his head in annoyance as he continued, "Destroying an 11-year-old's potion, Severus. Really? You are not a teenager anymore. Try not to get into petty prank wars with children. It does not reflect well upon you." Severus didn't even try and deny it now that it was just the two of them, not that Albus expected any differently. Severus did have his good qualities, but he could be an incredibly petty man, and they both knew it and accepted it. Which meant there wasn't really any reason to dwell on it further. So Albus continued in a more thoughtful tone, but if you truly cannot move past that, I suppose learning to deal with some minor antagonism now might help him be just a little more ready for the future. But while he might grow to dislike you without any true problems, he must learn to trust me, or all might well be lost. So target him if you feel you must, but know that unless you come to me with absolute proof of wrongdoing, I will continue to side with Harry. Regardless of what we both know of his guilt. Severus scowled even deeper and whirled around, his robes billowing as he moved towards the exit to the office. But just as he put his hand on the doorknob, he paused and harshly called out without turning around, "Trust is all very well, but you are also teaching him that he can walk over not just the rules, but even his professors and get away with it. Not just get away with it, but be supported in it, as long as he doesn't get caught. Keep teaching him that, and this is just the beginning. He will get worse and worse until you have a monster on your hands who cannot be controlled. You'll wish you had listened to me then. Do you really want to repeat history? To allow Hogwarts to produce another overpowered, entitled monster who thinks anything he is clever enough to get away with is acceptable?" The door closed with a slam behind Severus, and Albus leaned back in his comfortable chair with a sigh as he worked through his many contingencies, trying desperately to think of a way to truly salvage this whole situation, before it spiraled even further out of his control. He would remain there for quite some time. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.